I found my son, Marcus, dumped in a drainage ditch off the old highway, his clothes torn and his face swollen from the blows. His split lips could barely move when I rushed over, frantic with worry. With the little strength he had left, he managed to whisper a few words that chilled my blood. "It was Skylar. It was Harry, Mama. He said my low-class blood was disgusting." His eyes closed, and for a moment, I truly thought I had lost him forever. That morning had begun like any other in my small, well-kept bungalow. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the sound of birds nesting in the old pecan tree out back. I'm 65 years old, and since I lost my husband 10 years ago, my routine had become predictable but peaceful. I get up before dawn, bake sweet potato pie slices and biscuits to sell at the local farmer's market, and look after the hens my late husband left me as his only legacy. The rough texture of the dough between my fingers usually calmed me as I thought about Marcus, my only son. At 30 years old, he had managed to get a job in an office in the downtown financial district, something I never imagined for a man from our side of the tracks. He wore a suit every day, had his own car, and had married Skylar Sterling, a girl from a wealthy, established family who seemed to genuinely love him. The phone rang near noon. It was an unfamiliar voice telling me they had found a young man injured on the North County Road. When they mentioned his name, my hand started shaking uncontrollably. I raced over there, my heart pounding in my chest, unable to imagine what awaited me. Seeing my son in that state was like a punch to the soul. Blood had stained his white button-down shirt, the one he loved to wear to Sunday service. His cheeks were bruised and swollen, and he had cuts on his hands as if he had tried to defend himself. But what hurt most was the expression of profound humiliation in his eyes when he finally managed to open them. "It wasn't an accident, Mama," Marcus said, his voice broken, as I helped him sit up. "Harry sent his men. They pulled me out of my car and told me this was a warning." Tears streamed down his bruised cheeks, and I felt something break deep within my own chest. Harry Sterling, Skylar's father, was a mogul who controlled half the business in Clay County. He owned restaurants, a development company, and extensive plots in the commercial district. From the day of the wedding, he'd treated Marcus with contempt, as if he were something dirty that had tarnished the Sterling name. I drove Marcus home in silence, supporting him as he walked with difficulty. I put him to bed in his old room, the same one he slept in as a boy, and cleaned his wounds with warm water and antiseptic. His groans broke my heart, but I knew the deepest wounds weren't the ones I could see. "Mama, we can't do anything against him," Marcus murmured as I put a cold compress on his face. "He has the money, the power, the connections. If we go to the police, he'll say it was a regular mugging. Nobody will believe us." His resignation bothered me more than his injuries. That night, after Marcus finally fell asleep thanks to the painkillers, I sat in the kitchen, remembering the words of my own mother, Doris. She had passed when I was 40, but before she went, she taught me things I never thought I'd have to use. "The wealthy think folks like us don't keep records, that we're too busy surviving to remember secrets," Mama Doris used to say. "But we see everything. We hear everything, and when the moment's right, we use it." I picked up the phone, my hands now steady, and dialed a number I'd had memorized for decades. On the third ring, my older brother's gruff voice answered. "Isaiah," I said without preamble, "do you remember what Mama taught us in secret when we were children? It's time to put that knowledge to work." Isaiah Ike Johnson arrived at my house before sunrise, just as we'd agreed. My older brother was 70, but he still had that penetrating gaze that had calmed me since childhood. He carried a small, worn leather suitcase, the same one that had belonged to our father. As he sat at my wooden kitchen table, the creak of the chair reminded me of all the times we'd planned mischief as kids. "Tell me everything," he said, pouring coffee into Mama Doris's old tin mugs. I recounted every detail of what had happened, from the moment I found Marcus to his words about Harry Sterling. Ike listened in silence, with the patience only men who have lived long and learned to guard their emotions possess. Marcus woke up around 7, limping to the kitchen with his face still bruised. Seeing his uncle, his eyes filled with tears that he tried to hide. Ike walked over and hugged him, just like he did when Marcus was a child. "Son," Ike said in a low voice, "this is not going to stand, but I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Don't leave out a single thing." Marcus slowly sat down, touching his ribs carefully. "It all started a month ago. Skylar and I were planning to move into our own place. We'd saved $1,000 and found a perfect little spot on the outskirts of town." "And what exactly did he tell you?" Ike asked, pulling a small notepad from his shirt pocket, a habit he'd had since he was young. He always wrote down everything important. "He told me a man of my social class should never aspire to so much, that Skylar deserved better than the mediocre life I could offer her." Marcus paused, breathing hard. "Then he offered me $50,000 to walk away from his daughter and disappear from the state forever." I felt the blood rush to my head. Harry had treated my son as if he were merchandise that could be bought off. "And what did you tell him?" I asked, although I already knew the answer from the expression of wounded pride on his face. "I told him I didn't need his dirty money, that I loved Skylar and she loved me, regardless of what we had in the bank." Marcus wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "Yesterday afternoon, 2 men waited for me outside of work. They said they had a message from Mr. Sterling and forced me into a black SUV." The description that followed made my stomach turn. The thugs had taken him to an empty lot where Harry was waiting, sitting in his silver Mercedes S-Class. Without even getting out of the car, he had ordered them to beat Marcus enough so that he would understand the message. "Tell your mama this is only a warning," he had said, with that cold smile I knew from the few times I'd run into him at the bank. "That man believes he can do whatever he wants because he has money," I muttered, feeling rage build in my chest like a furnace. "But he's wrong. There are things money can't buy, like a family's dignity." Ike closed his notepad and looked at me with those eyes that had seen too much. "Elara, remember what Mama Doris told us about Harry Sterling Sr., the one who owned the big properties before Harrison took over?" Of course I remembered. Old Man Sterling had been the cruelest slumlord in the county back in the 50s. Mama had worked as a housekeeper in his house and had witnessed terrible things. When he died in a strange accident, his son Harrison inherited everything and built his empire on the foundation of his father's brutality. "Mama kept documents, didn't she?" Ike continued. "Things she saw, names of people who disappeared, accounts that didn't add up. She always said that information would serve justice one day." Marcus looked at us, not fully understanding, but I knew exactly what my brother meant. Our mother was uneducated but incredibly street smart. For years she had watched, listened, and memorized everything that happened in the houses where she worked. Before she passed, she had given me a metal box with photographs, letters, and documents she had managed to save. "The box is in the attic," I told Ike. "I haven't opened it since Mama's funeral, but I know it contains information about the properties Harrison acquired in the 60s through dubious means." My brother smiled for the first time since he arrived. "Then we have a place to start. But we need to be very careful. A man like Harrison didn't get where he is by being careless. He has contacts in the police, in the city council, and in the courts." Marcus tried to stand up, but the pain made him sit back down. "I don't want you getting into trouble because of me. I'll just leave town. I'll find work somewhere else. Skylar will understand." "Don't you dare!" I exclaimed with more force than I intended. "Your father didn't raise a coward, and neither did I. The Johnsons don't run when things get tough. We face problems head-on, no matter the cost." Ike placed his hand on mine with that warmth that had comforted me since I was a child. "Your mama's right, son. Besides, if you leave now, Harry will think he can do the same thing to any other humble family. We can't let that man keep thinking we're his playthings." Just then, we heard the sound of a car stopping in front of the house. Marcus paled and carefully approached the window. "It's Skylar," he whispered. "She's alone, but she looks very upset." Skylar got out of the car with teary eyes and disheveled hair. She wore a coral-colored dress that usually made her look radiant, but right now, she seemed drained, as if the color had run from her face. Her hands trembled as she approached the door, and I could tell she had been crying for hours. "Marcus, please open up," she begged, tapping gently. Her voice sounded broken, desperate. "I know you're there. I need to explain what happened. I need you to know I didn't know anything." My son looked at me, uncertain. Part of him wanted to run to her, but the humiliation and physical pain kept him frozen in the chair. Ike approached the window and looked carefully out onto the street. "I don't see any other cars. Looks like she came alone," he murmured. I opened the door, and Skylar practically collapsed into my arms. Her sweet perfume contrasted sharply with the smell of dirt and sweat that still clung to Marcus's clothes. "Ms. Delara, I'm so sorry. My father is a monster. I didn't know what he was capable of." I led her to the living room, where Marcus was waiting with clenched fists. When Skylar saw his beaten face, she covered her mouth, stifling a gasp. "Oh my God, Marcus, what did he do to you?" She reached out to touch him, but he instinctively recoiled. "Your father had me beaten because he thinks my blood is too poor to mix with his," Marcus said bitterly. "He offered me $50,000 to disappear from your life. I guess that's what I'm worth to him." Skylar sat on the worn sofa, wiping her tears with a lace handkerchief. "Last night, I overheard Dad talking on the phone with someone. He said the problem had been resolved, that he no longer had to worry about that boy. When I asked him what he meant, he yelled at me to stay out of his business." "And what did you do?" Ike asked, studying her every expression. He had inherited our family's natural distrust of wealthy people. "I checked his phone while he was asleep," Skylar confessed, dropping her gaze. "I found messages with someone called the Grizz. He had paid him $2,000 for disciplining the boy. When I read that, I immediately knew it was about you, Marcus." Silence filled the room. I felt the rage grow in my chest like a fire consuming everything in its path. Harry hadn't just ordered my son beaten. He had documented his crime as if it were nothing more than a commercial transaction. "There's something else," Skylar continued, pulling an envelope from her purse. "A man arrived at the house very early this morning. He handed this to my father and left without saying a word." The envelope contained blurry photographs that showed Marcus being beaten by two men while Harry watched from his car. "It's blackmail," Ike murmured, examining the images. "Someone else was out there last night, someone who photographed everything and now wants to profit from the situation." Marcus took one of the photographs with trembling hands. Seeing the graphic evidence of his humiliation seemed to awaken something in him. "We can't let this go on," he said, his voice firmer. "If we back down now, Skylar's father will think he can do whatever he wants to anyone he considers beneath him." Skylar moved closer to him. This time, Marcus didn't pull away. "I love you," she said, gently taking his hand. "I don't care what my father says. I don't care about his money or his social standing. I want to be with you no matter what." "Your father will never allow it," I replied, feeling a mix of tenderness and worry for the girl's naivety. Men like Harry Sterling don't accept defeat. If he can't separate you from Marcus with money, he'll find another way. "Then we have to be smarter than him," Skylar declared, with a determination I hadn't seen before. "I know his businesses. I know where he keeps his important documents. I know his routines and his contacts. If you're going to confront him, you'll need all the information you can get." Ike looked at her with new attention. "Would you be willing to help us, knowing that it could mean betraying your own family?" "My real family is right here," Skylar answered, squeezing Marcus's hand. "My father stopped being my family when he decided that love could be bought with money." I stood up and walked to the window, observing the empty street. The sun was beginning to warm the asphalt, and street vendors were starting to pass with their carts. It was a normal morning in a town where people worked honestly for a living, but I knew nothing would ever be the same after this. "All right," I finally said, turning back to face them. "But if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. We won't stoop to his level using violence. We'll use his own arrogance against him." Ike nodded, understanding my plan immediately. "Mama always said that powerful people make mistakes when they feel too secure. They get careless, They talk too much. They trust people they shouldn't. Exactly, I continued. Harry thinks we're ignorant, that we don't know how to defend ourselves. That's going to be his downfall. Skylar, I need you to tell me everything you know about your father's business. Every detail, every name, every suspicious transaction you've ever overheard. Skylar straightened up, drying the last of her tears. My father has a private office at the house where he keeps documents he never takes to work. It's always locked, but I know where he hides the spare key. He also holds secret meetings on Thursday nights, with men who arrive in cars without license plates. What kind of men? Marcus asked, his voice taking on a more decisive tone. Tough guys with scars who speak in low voices and constantly look over their shoulders. Dad meets them in the basement and always pays them in cash. Skylar paused, recalling something important. Once I overheard them mentioning something about land they had cleared for new developments. Ike and I exchanged a meaningful glance. That sounded exactly like the stories Mama Doris used to tell us about Harrison's father, when he used to coerce landowners into selling their property for far less than it was worth. Skylar, I said with a serious tone, would you be willing to get us access to that office? I wouldn't ask this if it weren't absolutely necessary, but we need solid proof of what your father is doing. The young woman didn't hesitate for a second. I will do whatever it takes to protect Marcus and to stop my father. It's time someone put a leash on him. 2 days later, Skylar returned to my house with a tense but determined expression. She wore a peach-colored blouse and dark pants, dressed as if for a business meeting. In her hands, she held a manila folder that seemed to weigh more than it should. Marcus had recovered enough to walk without a limp, though the bruises on his face still told the story of Harry's cruelty. I got the documents, she announced, setting the folder on the kitchen table. Dad left for one of his meetings last night and didn't return until very late. I had 3 hours to photograph everything I found in his private office. Ike immediately approached, adjusting the reading glasses he'd pulled from his shirt. He had worked as an accountant for a trucking company for 40 years and knew how to spot financial irregularities better than anyone. What kind of documents were you able to get? He asked as he opened the folder. Contracts for land purchases, cash payment receipts, photographs of properties before and after they were acquired. Skylar sat next to Marcus, who took her hand for support. I also found a list of names with dollar amounts next to them. Some names are crossed out in red ink. The contents of the folder chilled my blood. There were photographs of poor families being evicted from their homes, contracts signed under evident duress, and most disturbingly, a list of people who had disappeared after refusing to sell their property. I recognized some names: Mr. Jerome Vance, who had a small farm near the river, and the Morales family, who raised goats in the hills. They had all mysteriously vanished in the last 5 years. This man is worse than I imagined, I murmured, examining a receipt for $25,000 paid to someone identified only as the fixer. He doesn't just steal land, he eliminates anyone who stands in his way. Marcus went pale as he looked at the photographs. Skylar, if your father discovers you took these pictures, he'll do the same thing to you he did to these families. His voice trembled, not with fear for his own safety, but for the woman he loved. I've already thought about it, Skylar replied with a surprising firmness. That's why I also brought this. She pulled a small envelope containing a golden key from her purse. This is the spare key to his safe deposit box at the bank. That's where he keeps the cash he uses for these special jobs. Ike gave a low whistle. If we can prove he has $200,000 in unjustified cash, we can connect him to all these crimes. He stopped, looking at Skylar with concern. But getting that information is going to be very dangerous. Banks have security systems, cameras, guards. My father took me there several times when I was little, Skylar explained. I know the manager, Mr. Lewis. He's been a family friend for 20 years. I could convince him that I need to review some old inheritance documents that Dad left in my custody. It's too risky, I objected, feeling a mother's instinct to protect her daughter. If Harry finds out what you're doing, he won't hesitate to hurt you. Men like him have no limits when they feel threatened. Just then the phone rang, interrupting our conversation. It was a jarring sound that made all of us jump. Marcus went to answer, but after the second ring, the call was cut short. It immediately rang again, following the same pattern. 2 rings, then silence. "Someone is watching us," Ike murmured, cautiously approaching the window. "It's a signal. Someone wants to get our attention without risking being overheard." His experience in the army during his youth had taught him to recognize this type of communication. The phone rang a third time, but this time Marcus answered immediately. "Hello?" he said, his voice tense. On the other end, a gruff, clearly distorted voice spoke. "If you want justice for the boy, come to the old city cemetery at 10 o'clock tonight. Come alone. I have information you'll want." The call ended, leaving us in a tense silence. Skylar clung to Marcus's arm, her knuckles white from the pressure. "Do you think it's a trap set by my father?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "It's possible," I admitted, "but it could also be someone with valuable information who can't risk being seen with us in broad daylight." I remembered Mama Doris's words about the people in town. There is always someone who sees everything, but can't speak. Those people keep secrets until the moment comes to use them. Ike returned from the window, his expression worried. "There's a black SUV parked at the end of the street. It's been there since Skylar arrived. It can't be a coincidence." "It's my father's men," Skylar confirmed, growing pale. "I recognize them. He always sends surveillance when he suspects something." She stood abruptly, heading for the door. "I have to go. If they see me here too long, they'll report it to Dad." "Wait." I stopped her, taking her arm gently. "If you go to the bank tomorrow, do it early, before your father wakes up, and keep your cell phone on. If anything goes wrong, call the number I'm about to give you immediately." I wrote down the number of my cousin, Aunt Clara, a registered nurse who worked at the hospital. She was one of the few people in town who wasn't afraid of Harry Sterling and who had contacts elsewhere if we needed urgent medical or legal help. "Skylar," I said, looking her directly in the eyes, "I need you to understand that once we do this, there's no turning back. Your father will discover that you were the one who provided this information. Are you completely sure you want to go through with this?" The young woman looked at Marcus, whose eyes were filled with admiration and worry. Then she looked at me, and I saw the same determination in her eyes that I had seen in my own reflection during the most difficult times of my life. "Ms. Alara, my father destroyed my childhood with his cruelty and my youth with his obsessive control. I won't let him destroy my future with Marcus." She walked toward the door, but stopped before leaving. "Tonight, when you go to the cemetery, be very careful. My father has contacts all over the city. If someone recognizes or follows you, it could be a deadly trap." After Skylar left, the 3 of us remained in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The weight of what we were about to face was becoming terribly real. It wasn't just the story of a mother protecting her son. It was the story of ordinary people confronting a corrupt system that had operated in the shadows for decades. "Mama," Marcus said finally, "do you think we're doing the right thing? Maybe we should take the money Harry offered and start a new life somewhere else." I looked at him with the same seriousness with which my mother had looked at me when she taught me the most important lessons of life. "Son, there are moments in life when you have to decide what kind of person you're going to be. You can be the person who runs when things get tough, or you can be the person who stays and fights for what's right. Your father was the second kind, and so am I." At 9:30 that night, Ike, Marcus, and I walked in silence toward the old city cemetery. The streets were empty, save for a few stray dogs that followed us for a couple of blocks before disappearing into the shadows. The night air carried the scent of magnolia flowers mixed with the smell of damp earth that always preceded the rainy season. The old cemetery was located on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a rusty iron fence that creaked in the wind. The oldest gravestones dated back to the turn of the last century, many of them tilted by time and covered in moss. The full moon provided enough light to walk among the graves without tripping, but it also created unsettling shadows that seemed to move around us. "There he is," Ike murmured, pointing toward a figure waiting next to the Herrera family mausoleum. It was a tall, thin man, dressed in dark clothes and a cap that partially hid his face. As we got closer, I could see he was around 50 years old and had a scar running across his left cheek from his ear to the corner of his mouth. "Are you the family of the young man who was beaten?" he asked in a hoarse voice, keeping to the shadows. His accent suggested he wasn't from the area, likely from a bigger city up north. "We are," Marcus replied, stepping forward despite the pain in his ribs. "Who are you? Why do you want to help us?" The man removed his cap, revealing graying hair and eyes that had seen too much wrong. "My name is Daryl, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that I worked for Harry Sterling for 10 years, until my conscience couldn't handle the things he asked me to do anymore." "What kind of things?" I asked, although part of me already dreaded the answer. "Disappearances, threats, blackmail. Harry built his empire on the misery of families like yours." Daryl pulled a thick envelope from his jacket. "Here are copies of all the jobs I did for him between 2015 and 2023. Photographs, recordings, documents that prove how he operates." Ike took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why did you keep all this? Why didn't you go to the police?" "Because half the local police are on Harry's payroll," Daryl replied bitterly. "The chief gets $5,000 a month to look the other way. The judges get $10,000 to close cases involving Sterling's properties. The whole system is rotten to the core." Marcus moved closer to the man. "You're the one who took the photographs when I was beaten." "Yes. Harry hired me to document the lesson they were going to teach you. He wanted proof that you had been punished for daring to challenge his authority." Daryl spat on the ground in disgust. "When I saw those animals beating you, something broke inside me. I remembered my own son, who was your age." "So you also sent those photographs to Harry," I deduced. "You're trying to blackmail him." "It's not blackmail, ma'am. It's survival." The man moved closer, and I could smell the alcohol on his breath. "Harry found out I had copies of compromising information. Last night, he sent 2 of his men to my house with a message. Either I hand over everything I have on him, or I'd end up like the other families who got in his way." Ike opened the envelope and examined its contents using the light of a small flashlight. "There's enough evidence here to put him in federal prison for life," he murmured. "Falsified contracts, records of payments to hitmen, even photographs of him personally supervising violent evictions. The most important thing is at the bottom," Daryl indicated. "A recording where Harry admits to ordering the murder of Mr. Wallace Green, the community organizer who was resisting his land grabs. It was in 2019. The man officially died in a car accident." I remembered that case. Wally Green had been a respected man who tried to organize small landowners to resist Harry's pressure. His death had been very convenient for the mogul's expansion plans, but no one had questioned the official version of the accident. "Why are you giving this to us?" Marcus asked with justified suspicion. "What do you gain by helping us?" "Nothing. In fact, I'm probably going to die for this." Daryl put his cap back on, preparing to leave. "But I have a son your age working up north. If I don't stop Harry now, when my boy comes home, he could be the next victim of that man's arrogance." "Where are you going now?" I asked him, feeling a mixture of gratitude and concern for this stranger who had risked everything to help us. "Far away. Very far. I have contacts in other states who can get me new papers." He walked toward the cemetery exit, but stopped and turned back to us. "You have to be very careful. Harry already knows someone has information against him. He'll be paranoid, dangerous. Don't trust anyone in town because he has eyes and ears everywhere." "What about Skylar?" Marcus asked anxiously. "Is she in danger?" "More than you imagine. Last night I overheard Harry talking on the phone with someone about sending his daughter to a boarding school in Switzerland. He wants her out of town until all this blows over." Daryl paused. "But I also heard something more concerning. He mentioned that maybe it was time to permanently clean up the problem of his son-in-law's family. my hands involuntarily clenched into fists. "He's threatening us too." "Not just threatening, ma'am, planning. He has a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night with the fixer, the same man who handled Wally Green and the other disappeared families." Daryl's voice sounded tense for the first time. "If you're going to do something with this information, you have to act fast. After tomorrow, it might be too late." The man disappeared into the cemetery shadows, leaving us alone with an envelope full of evidence that could destroy Harry Sterling, but which could also cost us our lives if we didn't use it correctly. We walked back home in silence, each processing the implications of what we had heard. Marcus was slightly limping ahead, but with a determined step. Ike walked beside me, guarding the envelope as if it were the most valuable object in the world, which it probably was at that moment. "Mama," Marcus said when we reached the front door, "I think we should go straight to the city tomorrow morning. Hand all this evidence over to the U.S. Attorney's office, where Harry doesn't have contacts." "It won't be that easy," Ike replied. "That man's contacts reach further than you imagine. We need a smarter plan, something he won't expect us to do." We entered the house and sat around the kitchen table, the envelope between us like a ticking bomb. I knew the next few hours would be crucial, not just for getting justice for what had been done to Marcus, but for protecting all the families Harry had hurt and preventing him from hurting others. "I have an idea," I said finally, remembering something Mama Doris had taught me about fighting battles that seemed impossible to win. "But it's going to require us to trust Skylar completely, and for her to trust us completely." At sunrise, Skylar arrived at my house with red eyes and trembling hands. She wore an ivory blouse and dark jeans, but her clothes were wrinkled as if she had slept in them. In her bag, she carried a small voice recorder and several documents she had managed to take from the bank without raising suspicion. "I got it," she announced, dropping the documents on the table with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Mr. Lewis let me check Dad's safe deposit box. There was over $200,000 in cash, divided into stacks with labels that correspond exactly to the names on the list we found yesterday." Marcus approached to examine the papers, his face still showing the bruises from the beating. "Skylar, your father suspects something. He noticed you'd been in his office. He confronted me last night," she replied, her voice broken. "He asked me directly if I had been snooping around his business. I lied. I told him I was just looking for Mom's documents that he had put away after she passed." She paused to dry her tears. "But I don't think he completely believed me. This morning I found 2 of his men searching my room." Ike looked up from the documents he was examining. "Did they find anything compromising?" "No, because I had hidden everything in my aunt's attic." Skylar sat next to Marcus, who immediately put his arm around her shoulders. "But Dad told me he had made a decision. I'm scheduled to fly to a boarding school in Switzerland this afternoon. He says I need to get away from town until certain problems are resolved." I felt the time running out. If Harry sent Skylar out of the country, we would lose our most valuable source of information, and the only person who could testify directly about her father's criminal activities. "You cannot get on that plane," I told her firmly. "Once you're in Europe, your father will have the time and freedom to eliminate all the evidence and get rid of any witness who could incriminate him, including us." "What can I do?" Skylar asked desperately. "If I refuse to travel, he'll definitely suspect I'm working with you. And if he suspects that, then we have to act today," I declared, feeling my resolve harden. "Ike, did you review all the information Daryl gave us last night?" My brother nodded, placing a small recorder and several chronologically organized documents on the table. "Here's Harry's confession admitting he ordered the murder of Wally Green. We also have photographs of him supervising violent evictions, copies of falsified contracts, and receipts of payments to hitmen totaling over $500,000 in the last 5 years." Marcus picked up one of the receipts, examining it carefully. "This is the receipt for the payment to the Grizz for beating me, $2,000 for what he called a disciplinary correction service." His voice was controlled, but I could see the contained rage in his eyes. "And this is the most important thing," Ike continued, showing an official document, a copy of Harry Sterling Sr.'s original will, which specified that all properties should be donated to charitable organizations after his death. Harrison falsified a second will to inherit everything. Schuyler leaned in to examine the document. I recognize that handwriting. It's my grandfather's script, but it's definitely not his real signature. Dad used to practice imitating it when I was little. I thought it was just a game, but now I understand he was preparing to forge legal documents. The phone rang, interrupting our conversation. It was the same pattern as the night before, 2 rings and silence. This time, however, when Marcus answered, it was Daryl's voice, but it sounded much more urgent than before. You have to move right now, he said without preamble. Harry sped up his plans. The meeting with the fixer was moved up to 3 o'clock this afternoon. They're going to eliminate the whole family and make it look like a car accident on the mountain highway. How do you know that? Marcus asked, paling. Because the fixer is my younger brother, Trey, Daryl confessed, his voice broken. He called me this morning to warn me to get out of town immediately. Harry offered him $50,000 to eliminate the Johnson family problem without raising suspicion. Silence filled the room. We knew Harry would eventually resort to violence, but hearing that he had already put a price on our heads made everything terrifyingly real. Daryl, I said, taking the phone, will your brother accept the job? I told him yes to buy time, but he's actually willing to testify against Harry if you can guarantee protection for him and his family. He has recordings of other conversations where Harry plans more murders. Where can we meet him? At St. Michael's Church in 1 hour. Come through the back entrance, the one that leads to the garden, and bring all the evidence you have. My brother knows an investigative reporter who can make all this public before Harry has time to react. The call was cut short, leaving us with a mix of hope and terror. We finally had the chance to publicly expose Harry's crimes, but we also knew he wouldn't hesitate to kill us if he discovered our plan before we could execute it. Schuyler, I told her, I need you to call your father and tell him you accept the trip to Switzerland, but you need a few more hours to pack and say goodbye to some friends. That will give us time to get to the church and organize everything with Daryl's brother. And then? She asked. Once the story is published, Dad will immediately know I helped you. He'll want to kill me too. That's why we're going to make sure that by the time the story is published, he's already in police custody, I replied. Ike, call your contact at the U.S. Attorney's Office. Tell him we have evidence of multiple homicides and that we need immediate protection for witnesses. My brother nodded, heading for the phone. And if Harry's contacts in the federal government are more extensive than we think? Then we'll take the risk, I declared, because the alternative is to wait for the fixer to find us this afternoon and finish the job he was hired for. Marcus stood up, moving with determination, despite the lingering pain in his ribs. Mama, I want you to know that I'm proud of you. Dad would be proud too. Not many women your age would have the courage to stand up to a man like Harry Sterling. Your father taught me that there are moments in life when you have no choice but to fight, I replied, remembering the words my husband had told me during the hardest times of our marriage. When someone threatens your family, when someone tries to take your dignity, there is no room for fear, only room for action. Schuyler approached and hugged me tightly. Ms. Ilara, no matter what happens today, I want you to know that you have shown me what a real family means. My father gave me money and education, but you have given me something much more valuable, the example of what it means to fight for the people you love. We gathered all the evidence, organizing it into separate folders to provide copies to both the journalist and the federal authorities. We knew the next few hours would determine not only our fate, but the fate of all the families Harry had destroyed and all those he would destroy in the future if we didn't stop him. As we left the house, I looked back one last time. I didn't know if we would ever return, but I knew that no matter what happened, we had made the right decision. It was time to face Harry Sterling with his own weapons, the truth, the evidence, and the determination of people who had nothing to lose but their dignity. St. Michael's Church stood silently under the midday sun. Its cracked walls and tilted bell tower told stories of a century of prayers and secrets. We entered through the back garden, where wild roses grew unchecked among the wooden crosses marking the oldest graves in town. The air smelled of incense, mixed with the sweet scent of flowers beginning to wilt in the heat. Inside the church, a man waited, sitting in the last pew. He was younger than Daryl, perhaps 40 years old, but he had the same characteristic scar on his face and the same eyes that had seen too much violence. When we approached, he stood up with nervous movements, constantly glancing toward the doors as if expecting someone to follow us. "Are you the Johnson family?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "I'm Trey, Daryl's brother. I swear on my mother's memory that everything I'm about to tell you is the truth." Marcus stepped forward, extending his hand to greet him. "We are. Your brother said you have information that can help us stop Harry Sterling." Trey led us to the sacristy, where he had prepared a table with recorders, photographs, and chronologically organized documents. I've worked for Harry for 8 years as his problem solver. Every job is documented here, with dates, locations, methods used, and amounts paid. Ike approached to examine the documents, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the pages. "This is incredible. You have records of at least 20 murders, 50 violent evictions, and dozens of cases of extortion and blackmail." "The most important thing is here," Trey said, pointing to a digital recording. "Harry admitting he plans to eliminate his own daughter if she keeps helping you. The conversation is from last night, after he discovered Skylar had been at the bank checking his private documents." Skylar paled and staggered slightly. Marcus immediately held her, but I could see the shock in her eyes. "My father, he really said he was going to kill me?" His exact words were, "If that stupid girl thinks she can betray her own blood, she's going to learn that blood can also be spilled." Trey activated the recording, and Harry's voice filled the small room, cold and calculating, as always. "The problem with Skylar is that she inherited her mother's sentimental weakness," Harry was heard saying. "She thinks love is more important than family loyalty. If I have to choose between losing my empire or losing a disloyal daughter, the choice is obvious." Tears ran down Skylar's cheeks, but there was something more than pain in her expression. It was rage, a deep, profound rage that had been building since she discovered her father's true nature. "I want that monster to pay for everything he has done, not just to you, but to all the families he has destroyed." "There's more," Trey continued, showing recent photographs. "Harry has been preparing his escape. He has false documents ready, bank accounts overseas, and a private jet scheduled to leave tonight for a country with no extradition treaty. He knows someone will eventually expose him, and he's preparing to flee." "Why are you helping us?" I asked him directly. "What do you gain by turning in your boss after so many years working for him?" Trey took off his shirt, revealing deep scars on his back and arms. "These are the marks my own boss left on me when I made a minor mistake 3 years ago. Harry had his own men torture me to teach me discipline. Since then, I've been planning my revenge." "But there's something else," he added, pulling a photograph from his wallet. It was a girl about 10 years old, smiling in front of a rural school. "My daughter lives with her mother in a nearby town. Harry found out where she is and threatened to harm her if I didn't eliminate your family today. I can't let him use my little girl to force me to kill innocent people." The puzzle was starting to come together. Trey didn't just want personal revenge, he was trying to protect his own daughter from becoming another victim of Harry's blackmail. He was a desperate man trying to break the cycle of violence that had trapped him for years. "I have a plan," I announced, unfolding a map of the town on the table. "The investigative reporter will be here in 2 hours. We need to keep you safe until then, and we also need to make sure Harry can't escape before the story breaks." "How are we going to stop him?" Marcus asked. "That man has bodyguards, weapons, and contacts everywhere. We can't confront him directly." "We're not going to confront him directly," Trey replied with a chilling smile. "We're going to use his own paranoia against him. Harry is expecting me to eliminate your family this afternoon. Instead, I'm going to call him and tell him I found evidence that Skylar is planning to escape the country with you, taking compromising information." "That will infuriate him," I objected. "He'll want to kill us immediately." "Exactly, but it will also force him to move personally. Harry never delegates matters he considers truly important. He'll come here with few men, trusting that I've already eliminated the main threat. Trey pointed to various spots on the map. This is where we'll set the trap. Skylar approached the map, studying the strategy with surprising focus. I know my father's habits. He always takes his personal cell phone when he goes to supervise important jobs. We could record the entire conversation when he arrives here. It's risky, Ike murmured. If something goes wrong, if Harry suspects the trap, he'll kill all of us without hesitation. The alternative is to wait for him to take control of the situation, I countered. At least this way we have a chance to surprise him instead of being his passive victims. Trey checked his watch, showing increasing nervousness. The reporter should be arriving in an hour. I'll call Harry in 15 minutes to set the bait. You all need to be hidden, but in a position to record everything he says when he gets here. And after that? Skylar asked. After we have all the evidence recorded? Then we'll deliver everything to the federal authorities and the media simultaneously, I replied. We'll make so much public noise that not even your father's corrupt contacts will be able to protect him. Marcus took my hand, squeezing it tightly. Mama, I want you to know that no matter what happens today, I'm proud to be your son. You taught me that some battles are worth fighting, even when the odds are stacked against you. And you taught me that it's worth risking everything for the people we love, I replied, looking at Skylar with the affection that had grown for her during these difficult days. Now let's show Harry Sterling that he severely underestimated this family. Trey walked toward the sacristy phone, preparing to make the call that would set our final plan in motion. We all knew the next few hours would determine whether we would get justice or whether we would become the last victims of Harry Sterling's criminal empire. It's time, Trey murmured, dialing the number. The phone rang twice before Harry's familiar, arrogant voice answered on the other end. Boss, we have a serious problem, Trey said into the phone, modulating his voice to sound urgent but controlled. The girl Skylar isn't at her house. Her neighbors told me they saw her leaving early this morning with bags and documents. I think she's planning to run away with the Johnson family. From our hiding spot behind the main altar, we could hear Harry's heavy breathing through the speaker Trey had discreetly activated. Are you sure about that? The voice asked with that familiar coldness. My daughter doesn't have the guts to betray me like that. Boss, I found this in her room, Trey continued, holding up a fabricated photograph he had prepared. It's a picture of her with the Johnson boy at the bus station. Looks like they're planning to leave together this afternoon, probably heading to the city where they have press contacts. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted several eternal seconds. When Harry spoke again, his voice was trembling with contained rage. That stupid girl has no idea what she's doing. Did you eliminate the Johnson family yet like I ordered? I'm in position, boss, but I thought I should inform you about Skylar before I proceed. What do you want me to do with her when she shows up? Bring her to me alive. I want to speak to my daughter personally before I decide her fate. Harry's voice now sounded like the growl of a wounded animal. And make damn sure the Johnsons can't tell anyone what they think they know. Understood? Understood, boss. Are you coming personally to supervise? I'll be there in 30 minutes. This time, I want to make sure everything is done right. The call ended with a dry click that echoed in the silence of the church. Skylar was trembling violently, leaning against Marcus, who held her tightly. Did you hear that? She murmured, her voice broken. My own father just ordered my death over the phone. How can anyone be such a monster? Because for men like your father, power is more important than blood, I replied, moving closer to hug her too. But now we have definitive proof of his criminal nature. That conversation will destroy any public image he has tried to maintain. Ike checked the recording equipment, making sure everything had been captured perfectly. We have 30 minutes to set the trap. Trey is confident he can keep Harry fooled when he arrives. I've been acting for that man for 8 years, Trey replied bitterly. I know exactly what he expects to hear and how to behave to keep him confident. The important thing is for you to stay hidden until we have enough recorded evidence to completely sink him. The plan was simple but risky. When Harry arrived, Trey would report that he had captured the Johnson family and had them tied up in the sacristy, waiting for orders. This would force Harry to enter the church and speak openly about his crimes, confident that his victims couldn't escape to tell the tale. "What if he brings more men than we expect?" Marcus asked, instinctively touching the ribs that still hurt from the previous beating. "Harry is arrogant," Trey explained. "He believes I am completely loyal and that I've eliminated the main threat. He'll probably come alone or with one bodyguard at most. In his mind, he's already won this battle." We positioned ourselves carefully behind the main altar, where a thick curtain concealed us but allowed us to hear everything clearly. Skylar had set her phone to record as a backup, and Ike had the video camera ready that we had brought to document the entire encounter. The minutes passed slowly, each second marked by the ticking of the old tower clock that had kept the town's time for almost a century. The silence of the church was interrupted only by our nervous breathing and the distant sound of birds in the garden outside. Finally, we heard the roar of a powerful engine approaching. Trey discreetly peered through the window and signaled to us. It was Harry's silver Mercedes S-Class, exactly as predicted. "He came alone," Trey whispered. "His arrogance is going to be his downfall." Harry entered the church with firm steps, his impeccable linen suit contrasting with the humility of the sacred place. He wore sunglasses despite being indoors, and his Italian leather shoes echoed against the cracked tiles of the colonial floor. "Where are they?" he asked directly, without bothering with greetings. His voice filled the space with that authority he was accustomed to wielding over everything and everyone around him. "In the sacristy, boss, all three tied up and ready for whatever you order." Trey played his part perfectly, showing the deference Harry expected from all his employees. "And my daughter, did that traitor show up yet?" "Not yet, but I have the bus station covered. When she arrives, we'll be waiting." Harry headed toward the sacristy with determined steps, but stopped halfway down the aisle. "Trey, I want you to understand something. What we're going to do today is going to send a very clear message to the entire county. Nobody, absolutely nobody, defies Harry Sterling and lives to tell about it. Understood?" "Understood, boss. You want it to look like an accident, like the other times?" "No. This time, I want them to know exactly what happened and why." Harry's voice filled with a blood-chilling cruelty. "I want that when the bodies are found. Everyone understands that trying to humiliate me has fatal consequences." Skylar covered her mouth to stifle a sob, but Marcus calmed her with gentle strokes of her hair. Ike continued recording everything, documenting every word that came out of Harry's mouth as irrefutable evidence of his murderous intentions. "Furthermore," Harry continued, moving closer to the sacristy, "when Skylar shows up, I want you to bring her straight here. She's going to see exactly what happens to people who betray their own family. After that, she's taking the first flight to Europe and staying there until she learns to be an obedient daughter. And if she refuses to cooperate..." Harry stopped right in front of the sacristy door, so close we could smell his expensive cologne mixed with the cigar scent that always accompanied him. "Then Skylar is going to accompany the Johnsons on their final trip. I can't allow any member of my family to stain the Sterling name." Just then, we heard the sound of several cars arriving at the same time. Harry tensed immediately, looking toward the main door of the church with an expression that mixed surprise and suspicion. "Were you expecting company?" Trey asked him, his voice suddenly dangerous. "No, boss. I don't know who that could be." The church doors opened forcefully, and 3 men in dark suits entered, followed by a woman with a professional voice recorder and a television camera. It was the investigative reporter from the city, accompanied by a team from the U.S. Attorney's Office. "Mr. Harrison Sterling," one of the agents said in an official voice, "you are under arrest for multiple counts of homicide, extortion, and conspiracy. Everything you say can and will be used against you." Harry's expression changed from arrogance to complete shock in a matter of seconds. His eyes moved frantically between Trey, the agents, and the sacristy door where he believed we were hidden. "This is a mistake," he declared, his voice trembling for the first time since we had known him. "I don't know what you're talking about. I just came here to pray." At that moment, we emerged from our hiding place behind the altar. Harry saw us appear, and his face transformed into a mask of pure hatred. "You!" he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at us. "This is all your fault. A low-class family trying to destroy a successful man." "No, Mr. Sterling," I replied calmly, approaching him without fear for the first time since this whole nightmare began. "This is all your fault for thinking you were superior to other people, for thinking that money gave you the right to destroy innocent lives." The federal agents handcuffed Harry while he shouted accusations and threats that no longer held any power over us. The investigative reporter recorded every word, documenting the final collapse of a man who had built his empire on fear and violence. His impeccable suit looked ridiculous now, the metal cuffs contrasting with his image as a respectable businessman. "This is not going to stand," he bellowed as the agents escorted him toward the exit. "I have contacts who are going to make all of you pay for this. Nobody humiliates me and lives to tell about it." Skylar approached her father with firm steps, drying the last tears she would ever shed for him. "Dad, for 20 years I waited for you to love me like a daughter. Today I understood that you're incapable of loving anyone more than yourself. I hope the rest of your life in prison gives you time to reflect on all the families you destroyed." Harry looked at her with a mixture of contempt and something that might have been pain, but was probably just rage at being betrayed by his own blood. "Skylar, you are a sentimental fool, just like your mother. When I get out of this, and I will get out, you're going to regret choosing that trash over your own family." "My real family is right here," she replied, taking Marcus's hand and moving closer to me. "These people taught me what unconditional love means, something you could never give me despite all your money and power." The agents took Harry away for good, but before they left, the one who seemed to be in charge approached us. "Ms. Johnson, we need your entire family to come with us to give formal testimony. We also need to put you under temporary protection until we can arrest all of Sterling's associates." "How long will that last?" Marcus asked, worried about our safety and Skylar's. "Based on the evidence you provided, probably a few weeks. Sterling had an extensive network of corrupt contacts, but with all the documentation you gathered, we can clean up the entire local system." The agent handed us cards with contact numbers. "By the way, I want to congratulate you. Not many families would have the courage to stand up to someone like Harry Sterling." Trey approached before leaving, carrying a small bag that contained all the additional evidence he had collected during his years working for Harry. "Ms. Alara, I want to ask for your forgiveness for all the terrible things I did working for that man. I know I can't undo the damage, but I hope my testimony helps bring justice for all his victims." "Trey," I said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "we all deserve a second chance. The important thing is that you made the right decision in the end. That says a lot about the man you really are." Ike hugged his younger brother for the first time in years. "Brother, Mama Doris always said the truth has its own time to come to light. Today, her words came true." We left the church under the afternoon sun, breathing free air for the first time in weeks. The town streets looked different now, as if the weight of oppression had been lifted from all the corners where Harry had extended his influence. Neighbors began to come out of their houses, whispering the news of the capture of the man who had controlled their lives for so long. 3 months later, I returned to my routine of baking biscuits in the mornings, but now my kitchen was full of laughter. Marcus and Skylar had gotten married in a simple ceremony in the garden, surrounded by all the extended family and neighbors who had found the courage to testify against Harry's crimes once they knew it was safe to do so. "Grandma Elara!" Little Maya, my neighbor's granddaughter, shouted. She was an 8-year-old girl with bright eyes that reminded me of my own Marcus when he was small. "Is it true that you beat the bad man who scared the whole town?" "No, my dear," I replied, stroking her hair as she fed the chickens with corn kernels. "We didn't beat anyone. We just showed him that the truth is stronger than fear, and that when families stick together to protect each other, they can face any problem." Skylar appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a lavender dress she had bought at the local market. She had sold all her expensive jewelry and designer clothes, using the money to help the families her father had harmed. "Mother," she said, using the affectionate term I love to hear, "Marcus is ready to go to the courthouse. They're reading the final sentence today." The trial had lasted 2.5 months. Harry was sentenced to life in federal prison for multiple homicides, plus 30 additional years for extortion, illegal land appropriation, and conspiracy. His properties were confiscated and sold, with the money distributed among the victims of his crimes. The system of corruption he had built crumbled like a house of cards once the light of truth illuminated it completely. "How do you feel?" the investigative reporter who had helped us asked when we met outside the courthouse after hearing the sentence. "Do you feel vindicated for everything your family suffered?" "It's not about vengeance," I replied, looking up at the blue sky, where the clouds moved slowly, pushed by the wind. "It's about justice. It's about proving that in this country, no matter how much money you have or how much power you think you have, no one is above the law." Marcus put his arm around my shoulders as we walked back to the car. "Mama, do you think Dad would be proud of what we did?" "Your father always told me that the Johnsons aren't a family that gives up easily," I replied, feeling my late husband's warm presence in the wind that moved the tree leaves. "I think he would be very proud to see how his son became a brave man and how his daughter-in-law became part of our family the right way." Skylar approached from the other side, taking my free arm. "Ms. Alara, there's something I want to tell you. Marcus and I are expecting a baby. It's due in March, and we want to name him after your husband if it's a boy, or after your mother if it's a girl." I felt tears of happiness streaming down my wrinkled cheeks. After all the years of pain and loss, after all the battles I'd had to fight, I was finally seeing the dawn of a new generation that would grow up in a town free of the fear that had dominated it for so long. "You're going to be wonderful parents," I told them, already imagining that baby running in my garden, feeding the hens, listening to the family stories I would tell him or her so they would never forget where they came from and why it was important to always defend the truth. That night, sitting in my rocking chair on the front porch, I watched the stars shining clearer than ever in the town sky. Ike had stayed for dinner, and his laughter mixed with Marcus and Skylar's from the kitchen, where they were doing the dishes and planning the future. The phone rang once, but this time it wasn't a threat or a warning. It was my cousin, Aunt Clara, calling to tell me they had opened a new community health clinic downtown, funded with part of the money recovered from Harry's assets. Medical services, that had been a privilege for the wealthy for decades, were now available to all working families. "Alara," Clara said excitedly, "they're going to need nurses and administrators for the new clinic. Do you think Marcus and Skylar would be interested in working there? It would be perfect for a young family just starting out." I hung up the phone feeling the circle was complete. Justice had not only punished the guilty, but it had opened new opportunities for honest families to thrive in an environment free of corruption and fear. As I prepared for bed, I remembered the words my mother had told me decades ago. "Alara, there are moments in life when you have to choose between being a victim or being a fighter. The difference isn't in the strength of your arms, but in the strength of your heart." That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, knowing that we had chosen to be fighters, and that our children and grandchildren would grow up in a world a little more just, thanks to the decisions we had made when all seemed lost. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.